Well, let's find out what my next guest thinks. Nice to say, commentator Sam Armstrong joins us on a Tuesday for a change. Were you very busy and important doing something else on Monday?
Always. Top secret.
Top secret. You could tell us, but then you'd have to kill me. Yeah.
And the listeners too.
And the listeners.
That would be hard work.
That would take a long time. That would take a long time. Right, let's talk about this reform, this poll for YouGov for Sky News. I have to say that bit. I mean, absolutely fascinating. We were told this is a big poll. I mean, it's not one of those, it's not one of those epics of 20,000 polls. It's like 2,500 people or so. But it's a consistent poll that they carry out, about your voting intention. And these have proved pretty accurate over the years. Labour on 25%, according to this poll. Reform on just 24%, just 1 point behind. Tories at 22%. Lib Dems at 14%. Greens at 8%. How significant is this?
Well, I think it fits a pattern now of polling that is beginning to show a series of consistent things. Firstly, the old days of a two-party system in British politics are just gone. This is no longer two-party politics. We might have two-party representation, but we do not have a two-party country.
Didn't everyone say that in 2010, and then in 2015 we got a majority Tory government again?
Well, I think what is clear now is that the coalitions that existed there do not exist. Nowhere is that more true than on the right of British politics. Back then in 2010, UKIP was sitting at 4, 5, 6 points in the polls. And I tell you what it did back then. That support for UKIP in the 2010 election cost the Conservatives a majority in Parliament, and it meant that we had that Lib Dem coalition. Today, though, it's completely and utterly different. Reform are now sitting ahead of the Tories. I think it's certainly the case when you look at the balance of polls that the Tories and Reform are neck and neck.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, and I think this is the most consequential thing going on right now in British politics, the Labour Party are still, despite everything going on, despite the widespread, rampant, unprecedented unpopularity for a government so early on in tenure, they are still on track to be able to govern after the next election. Yeah. And that's the remarkable thing.
Yeah, but that's the way our system works. But again, you even have, say, in Germany, and you see what's happening in France as well, even with their proportional representation, which is something I know, well, the Lib Dems were calling for, not so much anymore. Now they've got, 72 seats under the system, even though getting fewer votes than Reform UK, who only ended up with 5 seats. But what's happened with in France and Germany is basically whatever happens in the election, the other parties will combine, even far left and the middle, centre right, they will combine to prevent what they consider to be far right, but harder right parties. But it is interesting. If you add up Labour with the Lib Dems and the Greens, you get to 47%. Reform and the Tories, you get to 46%. And the argument for the Tories has long been, well, if it's Reform's fault that we're not in, because actually a lot of those Greens and Lib Dems would never vote Labour. We'd be in power, and it's the fault of Reform. But that shows a certain arrogance. The idea that well, we deserve to have the votes. Well, I mean, realistically, it's the same as with a lot of these other parties. Reform, UKIP, the Brexit Party, and now the Reform Party, all vehicles for Nigel Farage. They were all created by failures of the Conservative Party to pursue conservative policies.
Absolutely, and for thousands, if not now millions of voters, they are upset, they are disappointed, they feel let down. And why shouldn't they? After 14 years of Conservative government, so-called right-wing government, and of course in 2019, Reform got comparatively few votes because of the deal that Nigel Farage did.
Boris Johnson's majority is almost entirely down to Nigel Farage standing aside in hundreds of seats.
But what did those Reform voters get in exchange for their support? Yeah. They got lockdown, they got net zero, they got a watered-down Brexit, and an immigration.
They got people losing their jobs for saying that trans women are men, because that's what they are.
And net migration of over 1 million a year. And you can understand why we've ended up in a situation in which those people are no longer happy. But here's the thing. I do think at this point, looking at the bleakness, sheer bleakness of 10 years of Keir Starmer government, that a deal...
Seriously, I can't do that. I can't do that. I'm leaving. I can't. No, I won't say that because that will make Remainers all happy. I can't do 10 years of Keir Starmer as PM.
Well, what that requires then is a deal. But this deal is not going to be, I think, like last time. I think this deal is going to have to recognise the fact now that Nigel Farage is no longer a supplicant. He's no longer the smaller party.
He's not a little persuader on the side. He's not a little yes.
He is a major major fixture of British
I don't think
politics.
the Tories were willing to do it. I don't think Nigel Farage is going to be willing to do it. I don't think lots of voters are willing to do it. I think there's a very strong argument.
Well,
a lot of this poll shows also how toxic, just how unbelievably toxic the Conservative brand is, more toxic, interestingly, than Reform. Can I just say, by the way, one of the things I found most fascinating by this poll, and there's so much more I want to talk about, so let's not spend too long on this, but the most fascinating thing is that when people were asked, whether the first 6 months of Keir Starmer's premiership, whether it had been good or not, whether it had been successful or not, 60% said unsuccessful, various other people said, neither unsuccessful. 10% of those polled said that it had been a successful first 6 months. And I tweeted last night, what would an unsuccessful 6 months look like? Another pandemic, total economic collapse, nuclear war, or what else? But what I absolutely love, though, is the fact that people were pointing out that those 10% were made up of, and this is just wonderful. People were pointing out it's train drivers, NHS workers. Someone pointed out public sector lanyard tards. You know exactly what they mean by that as well. You know who those people are. Oh, there's a certain sort of, particularly certain sort of woman, isn't there, a lanyard tard? They said...
Rachel from accounts.
Rachel from accounts being epitomises that, and people who are working in the BBC, people in the BBC canteen, and nonsense. They said basically that does account for the 10% of the population who think, no, it's all gone great.
Well, this is the genius of Keir Starmer, and credit to him and Morgan McSweeney. They have a very clear sense of who their people are. They know who those people are.
Public sector
workers. They know
workers.
what they want, and they are intent on giving it to them. And they are 30% in total of the British public. And if that 30% of the British public, which would represent a small drop in Keir Starmer's support, and remember he got fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn once did, if they come out again for the Labour Party and the Conservative and Reform votes split evenly, Keir Starmer is going to be Prime Minister for 10 years.
With another big majority. That's the reality.
Big majority.
Your reaction to that, folks, give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Should there be a deal? But who should be the stronger party in the deal? Let's talk about where Labour are, though, because the fact that Keir Starmer, 6 months into his terribly successful premiership, after waiting all these years, the Great White Hope, the fact that he's having to, doing some speech about AI, talking abject nonsense about our future as an AI superpower, never going to happen because of our energy costs, because of other policy he and the Tories have been pursuing for years. He had to shore up his Chancellor. Rachel Reeves just back, bleary-eyed from China. She's making a statement in the House of Commons later today. No doubt that's going to go not very well. Not very good at thinking on her feet, same as the Prime Minister. But basically, if you're being asked, do you have full confidence in your Prime Minister, and twice you're asked and refused to answer whether that your Chancellor will still be Chancellor in the next election. Now, actually, no Prime Minister could guarantee anyone in their job election. But that's... And then later on, Downing Street having to say yes, because, of course, those questions continued. And, one of her deputies in the Treasury, Tulip Siddiq, the anti-corruption minister, Charities now saying, because she's being probed over corruption and involved with her former Bangladeshi Prime Minister, her aunt, and a flat that she owns in King's Cross, supposedly given to her by a close ally of her aunt, that actually doesn't appear to be declared properly, that she shouldn't even be allowed to do that part of her job, because someone being investigated for corruption can't be in charge of overseeing anti-corruption. We've already lost Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, a month or so ago. This is not going terribly well. Well,
Julia, isn't it great to have the grown-ups back in charge? We were promised an end to the drama, an end to the scandal, an end to all of it. And as you say, we've had a Transport Secretary sacked for being a literal fraudster. We have an anti-corruption minister under investigation for corruption. We have an economy in which every single warning light is blinking, is ringing, the alarms are sounding. We are literally at the stage where I think we could now see a small-scale runs on banks in the near future because of the lack of trust, lack of faith in the economic plan that this country's got. And by the way, the economic wealth creators are fleeing en masse.
Bye-bye.
And all of those promises of higher investment in public services... And growth, what are we seeing instead? Cuts from the Labour Party. Why? Because they have squeezed taxpayers too hard, too fast,
as your
and
party
they've ended up into economic
They got
mess.
worse, but as your party did for years as well. But the reality is, they box themselves in with so many of these promises. Oh, we're not going to raise this tax, that tax. They have to do other taxes. They end up they end up having to make spending cuts if that's what they do. They can't borrow anymore. The cost is untenable. They may well end up upsetting the very constituents who vote for them. But I think to avoid doing that, they'll end up making really bad cuts. I would love it if they massively cut the benefits bill. Do I think that they will cut the right stuff from benefits, as in basically saying to people, no, you can go back to work? No, I don't think they will. And by the way, the time to have done that was when the jobs market was booming, and not now. It's fascinating. Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. 0344 499 1000. I mean, I don't see her surviving. I mean, Rachel from accounts has not proved to be a very good. You can already hear, some backbench MPs anonymously briefing newspapers saying she's got to go. She's part of the problem, and they need a U-turn. I don't know if Keir Starmer particularly understands the economics, but I worry that neither does the Chancellor, which is a concern. Let's talk about international affairs, though. Joe Biden last night, his final foreign policy speech before he shuffles, and it will be a shuffle, off the world stage by Monday with the inauguration of Donald Trump. He's saying that we are looking at being on the brink of a ceasefire deal and a hostage return deal between Israel and Hamas. We've got, very senior people flying in to Doha to Qatar to have this conversation, to finalise things. Again, we've got this, apparently this close before and nothing's happened, but we're looking at the return of, who knows, somewhere between 80 and 100 hostages, hopefully still alive, but that they would be released on a staged basis over a period of weeks. Also, the release of 1,000+ prisoners, Hamas terrorists back on the streets. Lots of aid money to Gaza. Oh, I wonder how that'll be spent. We know how the last lot was spent by Hamas. I can really understand why people are desperate to get this deal. My God, if it was my family member, I'd want it more than anything in the world. But you could also understand why many on the right in Israel, especially in Benjamin Netanyahu's government, are saying, we're just going to... What's the point of trying to defeat Hamas now if we're just going to allow them to rebuild in a few months' time?
Well, I've no doubt that, like every deal the Democrats seem to do in the Middle East, it will be a bad deal. But
especially see, Biden wants to get the deal before Monday.
Well, this is a really interesting thing about American politics, and that's the timing of this. Changes in president trigger massive foreign policy implications, and actually getting the hostages back is, in my view, the first foreign policy achievement of Trump's second term. Yep. Why are Hamas coming to the negotiating table now? Yep. Because they think if they're still holding hostages, there's a kick-off in the region, and Donald Trump is sat in the Oval Office. Boy, are they going to be in for something in the form of direct US military action. And what you're seeing here is Hamas rushing to try and do a deal through. Now, they might still get a good deal. They might not. Who knows? Yeah. But actually what they're trying to do is they're trying to get this all resolved before Trump is there. And that's,
he said all hell will break out. I mean, that's a great threat. It's just he has made it really clear with the Secretary of State and all his statements previously. He is 100% on the right side, Israel, the side that has not provoked the war. And I'm saying fully supportive of that. We shall see what happens. What do you make also of this special counsel report that's been released? I mean, just days before Donald Trump is going to be signed into office. Special counsel Jack Smith has been looking into whether or not there was evidence of Donald Trump inspiring his supporters to commit acts of physical violence, the January 6 riots back in 2021. And he says there is clear enough evidence for a jury to convict him. And he basically said if he knowingly spread a false narrative about fraud in the 2020 election, and basically if he hadn't been elected as the next president and therefore has presidential immunity, he would have been able to convict him. I agree with Jack Smith. I am glad Donald Trump is elected and not Kamala Harris. I think there's going to be lots of good things coming out of it. There might be some bad things as well, but lots of good coming out of it. But I also feel that what he did in 2021 was absolutely beyond the pale and undemocratic. But is this helpful now?
Well, I mean, actually, I thought what the protesters or the rioters on January 6th did was treasonous. I thought it was wrong. It was appalling, and they should have been punished to the full extent of the law. I actually don't agree with what Jack Smith's saying, and actually what I think it is it represents the end of this kind of politicisation of the justice system.
There's always been politicised in America. It is intended to be politicised.
It is a relatively recent phenomenon that every single president now gets shoved under investigation by their successor, and it's sad because it sends America to the kind of things we see in tin pot dictatorships around the world, the kind of things that we see in the developing world. And actually, I think it's actually wrong to prosecute someone on the basis of setting a false narrative. I mean, that is a major, major, major assault on free speech, which in America is protected under the First Amendment, which is you have the right to speak. Now, look, you might think Donald Trump is mad for saying what he said about the election. You might think there is no leg to stand on the fact he was defrauded on the election. I would agree with you. But that does not give you the right to prosecute him.
He entreated, like, was it the Georgia Attorney General to, quote, find votes? I'm sorry, that's electoral corruption.
Well, there was one... Well, firstly,
it's on tape.
Firstly, that is not the particular charge that we're talking about here.
Okay, yeah.
What we're talking about here is inspiring in January the 6th. But and secondly, look, I think that was one extract out of a large thing. Now, look, I agree that what Donald Trump did there was shameful and wrong. But I think the moment you go down the line of prosecuting your political predecessors and successors and rivals for things that they have said that you disagree with, you are in very, very, very dangerous waters.
Oh, no, I do absolutely agree with you on that, whether or not, it's a good thing or not. Look, we're going to take a quick break. It's 10:22.